wanting more than that. Can't do that. Got another appointment right after this, so I'd rather start a little bit early and have the opportunity. I want to, where'd he go? Paul, Supervisor, Paul Perone. Good to see you here. And good to see you maskless a little bit there too. It's nice to be outdoors where we can do it. I'm vaccinated, COVIDated, or whatever you want to call it, and doing well. I encourage people, I said encourage, not mandate, but I encourage people to get the vaccine. It's out there. And frankly, we all know people who aren't with us anymore who died as a result of the virus. And it's a good thing to try to protect yourself. But that's your decision. But as a result of Operation Warp Speed, we do have a vaccine in a much quicker time, unbelievably so than others. And so the vaccine is there for you to use, and we're grateful for the research entities that put it together and did it quickly.
Yes, which had nothing to do with Operation Warp Speed.
Okay, well, we'll go on this morning, and each of us have our positions. I want to first of all say it's great to be back here with you. I see the First Lady of the Legislative District here. I'm sure that your hubby's up in Lansing right now doing the work. Thanks for joining us. Don't want to miss anybody else as I look around here. The opportunity is here for you today to be in a live town hall. We haven't been able to do that for some time. This is the fourth one we've done since things started opening up. And we'll have the opportunity to go to all of the counties, various communities, the larger cities and the smaller townships and whatever, to be back with you. But it has been a time that we were locked down and not able to do it other than in teletown halls. And probably a good number of you have been able to be in the teletown halls as well. And we're always glad for the opportunity because it gives us a chance to report back and to hear from. But as we start today, I would like to ask if there's anything that you would like to hear. And if you want to hear somebody else talk, you're welcome to ask that person to come up and be the spokesperson today. Otherwise, if you're here for what we call this community gathering, and because we're outdoors, if you want to hear that, then I'm glad to be part of it. But you probably have some things that you would want to address or say to me. We use these cards, and Michelle will be the moderator here today for that. But before we go to those, I'm sure that there are some questions or issues that you would like me to hear. So we're just going to open up right now, and if someone wants to ask a question, I'd be glad to take it. Yes?
Why'd you throw out my vote?
Well, that is a state issue. Our governor has taken charge of that. Last week, she came out the first time in giving us metrics on what it will take for us to get to the point where the state can open up, including go maskless. And she's, right now we're at 50% of the people, at least that's what I heard this morning on WJR driving over here. 50% of the people in the state have been vaccinated. At 55, then I think there's an opening, further opening of some percentage on restaurants, and the fact that we can be outside without masks on, and in certain levels. At 70%, it opens up totally. There's a concern, as a result of what we've seen so far, that we'll ever get to 70%. Across the nation right now, it's about the best that can be done is 60% of the people that are willing to take the vaccine. And so will we ever get to 70? That's a concern. I personally think that we should be open right now. I just got back from our annual planning retreat in Florida this last week, and it was amazing how open it was. And still people showed deference to others. They wore masks where it was appropriate, or the business said, in order to enter, you need a mask. restaurants were fully open. We walked in with masks on, and as soon as we sat down, of course, like here, we were able to eat without a mask on. But right now, Florida and other states that have opened up far more rapidly than Michigan
How far
have
ahead
better
they
outcomes
are
than
this
we have
season?
right now.
It's practically summer-like conditions, aren't
Another question.
there? Lots of outside stuff going on.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to start, if I could, just to make a land acknowledgement that we are on the traditional lands of the Kickapoo, the Potawatomi, the Fox, the Florida Miami people, and the descendants of the Lake and honor them for their faithful stewardship of this country. I had a question. I think it was about a couple weeks ago at a town hall in Cambridge where you would say you maintain there is no such thing as systemic racism in our country, and that you personally don't know anybody who is racist.
No, I didn't say that.
In your wide circle.
In my wide
Where you
circle,
consider
yeah.
practice, yes. At the same time, Rick Santorum was making his comments that basically said, when we came to this land, there was nothing here. We created a clean slate. Oh, well, there were Native Americans here, but let's be honest, there's really nothing in their culture. In light of knowing those comments, would you care to maybe change that statement? Do you think that, I think that's pretty representative of a lot of people, do you think the system that is produced that could possibly not have built into it that those views reflected?
What, as I said in my comments, there are racists in this country. There are racists of all colors in this country. But our country isn't systemically racist, so we wouldn't have what we have today in our country.
Did it magically
Including
change
African
in
American
1967?
president, an African American vice president, members of Congress who are African American and other minorities. We wouldn't have that. I guess I go back to the definition of systemic. What is the definition of systemic? What's your definition?
I would say it's racism that got built into the system because of the views of the people who built the system.
Then what are those views?
Good definition, yeah. You really nailed it.
What are those views?
What are those views? Well, let's take what Rick Santorum basically
No, not
said.
what Rick Santorum. You said about what's built in our system.
Right.
Rick is relatively new,
Right, but he reflects.
Slavery, Jim
but
Crow,
he doesn't reflect
the war
you
on
and me.
drugs.
Well, he does. He reflects a pretty broad range of white American
No, I don't think so.
Whoever's
I
in charge of
do,
this guy, give him his talking points and we'll get back to him.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Yeah, leftist talking
Community, people in the
sure.
community, you know, we got
For a discussion on a
Go ahead,
Nobody's
let-
systemically racist
whoa.
here. Nobody's systemically racist here, pal.
Well, hang on a second. Let's listen here.
I'm trying to be respectful.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Um, I'm saying Rick Santorum's reflected that basically when he came here, he basically said there was nothing here. Well, wait, there were people here, but there's nothing of value that we've kept in their values. He actually said we came and we brought our values from white European values. So I believe those were built in. Let me ask you this. We the people, who was we the people when the Constitution was written? Who did that refer to?
It refers to we the people who were in the United States at that time.
Okay.
That was us.
No, it did not refer to women. They were specifically excluded. It did not refer to natives. They were called merciless savages, and it did not refer, obviously, to black people because in that same document, they had no problem saying they're free fishing a person in order to make a political compromise between them.
Is that what our Constitution says today?
Yeah, there's still
No, it doesn't.
51 gender-specific pronouns. Everyone.
We have a Civil Rights Amendment in our Constitution.
It magically changed everyone's hearts.
We have all sorts of freedoms, and we have founders that said we're perfecting a union. We weren't perfect, we still aren't perfect. We never will be perfect. I'm here, you're here. So what I'm saying is, systemically, I don't agree with Rick Santorum. Rick Santorum doesn't speak for me. It doesn't speak for an awful lot of people in this country. Systemic is I checked out in Webster's. Let me just read it to you so you know that I'm not just making it up. It's an adjective relating to a system, especially as opposed to a particular part. That could be Rick Santorum. That could be many people of different colors and persuasions as well.
Could be the war on drugs, sending black people to
Related to a system, especially as opposed. Systemic racism, a form of racism that is allegedly embedded through laws within society or an organization. We don't have laws embedded in our Constitution or in most of our laws that are being dealt with, changed, altered today to make sure that we are more perfect union. I don't know in this county of Monroe that I could find any systemic racism that goes on. Could I find a racist? My aides, Dustin, could tell you how many times we've gone past a Confederate flag still flying at some spot in Monroe County, and my statement has been, I don't get this. Why?
And yet you
Why?
said the Confederate generals
So anyway,
heroes that fought for their country.
Bottom line is, we're not a systemic racist country. We have problems, we're fixing those. We don't have Jim Crow laws anymore. We've fixed those. And so that's where I come down. I have an African son-in-law. I have 2 African American granddaughters as a result of that. I married that African to my daughter. I performed the wedding ceremony. So I can speak for myself. I'm proud of the Native American heritage in Monroe County. I just came earlier from the Battlefield National Park. And that pays homage to the history that went on here in this community. So we've got work to do, but that's why I made the statement I made. Let's go. I think you had a question, and then I'd like to move on. Maybe sometime we can do that. Yes, sir.
Concerned about that issue.
Well, I appreciate that. In the first 100 days of the new administration, $6 trillion were authorized for spending. Now, it was sold for various things. COVID relief, when in fact, when we looked at the COVID relief bill that ultimately was passed, only 6% of that bill was for COVID health care. That was it. And that's an issue of concern. I voted against that for that reason, not because of health care needs. I voted for $4 trillion on the first COVID relief bill. We did it in a bipartisan fashion. Democrats and Republicans voted for it. We saw a pandemic of major proportions that we knew we needed to deal with. And we did that. Ultimately, it gave us the vaccine and the opportunity to move forward. It gave dollars for education. It gave dollars for various concerns dealing with businesses, PPP, etc. But we can't keep spending like that. And Republicans and Democrats bear responsibility over time. But my vote since then is the only thing I can do is say no when you go to spending things that aren't justified. No matter how good they are, there's a point in time when we are not going to suffer well with having inflation and the rest come forward. We're $28 trillion in debt right now. None of us will ever see the payoff of that $28 trillion. We've got to start by reducing the deficit spending. The only way I know of doing that is grow the economy like we were and cut the spending. And that's like we do in our homes as well.
gave a $2 trillion tax cut to them. They bought back stock.
I'm also concerned about large tech and what they're doing to the so-called culture of the U.S. I'm talking about Facebook and Twitter and those kind of things where they control what people hear. And all the stories that are actually put out. I'm not sure what you can do about that either, but I think it needs to be reined in a little bit. I'm thinking about that one issue about Hunter Biden that the Post put out and Facebook knocked it down immediately.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of issues like that.
We're having here, his concern is with the big tech and their ability to censor some and not censor others. When you have the opportunity to censor the President of the United States, but you also have the opportunity to keep Iran and Korea getting their information out, that's a concern. It's a concern to me because we gave them special provisions under Section 230 that said because you are an organ that will get out media, more or less like the free press, we're going to give you an exemption from having liability cases brought against you and lawsuits because we don't want to restrict the freedom of information in the press. Well, that's all well and good when they do it across the board. I mean, we expect that they don't carry obscenity sites, that human trafficking doesn't take place. That's fine. We expect them to censor that. But the rest, whether we agree or disagree with an issue, at least my position is, I ought to be willing to do the research to find out if it's true or not. And if I don't like the platform, don't go to it. But they have changed that. They have 230 protections. And regardless of whether you like what Donald Trump said or what Joe Biden says, they ought to have the opportunity to use the platform because we give them the freedoms to do it. So that's where we're at right now. So we're going to continue pushing on it.
Stop whitewashing this like it didn't happen.
This is an example. This is an example of someone who wants to shut down normal, rational communication at this
He's
point.
talking about stuff
So that's
that
what
he
we're doing.
lies. He's a liar. He's a liar and an oath breaker. Liar and oath breaker is what he is.
Okay. Do you have a comment you could make on the hypothesis or evidence of gain-of-function research using CRISPR technology to possibly be behind the coronavirus and what we're seeing here versus the zoonotic hypothesis? And do you have any comment you can make there?
I have no idea what you're talking about on those hypotheses, but
I mean, you've heard it. I mean, just a comment. You haven't heard
I haven't heard of any of those.
BSL-4 laboratories, gain-of-function research.
I have not heard of that, but I do have opinions on where that virus came from.
Okay.
It came from China, came from Wuhan, and I believe it was let go. I can't prove that, and hopefully research will be continued to find out exactly where it came from.
Let go like laboratory.
And those at a laboratory, and those who were responsible for it paid for it.
So not bat soup. Laboratory.
No.
Okay. Making sure, but
Yeah.
bat soup.
No, but I didn't know.
Gain of function would be laboratory.
Yeah,
in
I
the
don't-
laboratory that use gain of function to do it.
I'm not that literate in those terms.
It's just a conspiracy
Happy to help.
that he wants you to support and echo. That's
Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Congressman, for coming. Kind of a different topic. Can you talk about what's going on with rural broadband?
We have been expanding it. And let me take a little bit back in history. Under the Obama administration, they put forward, by policy order, something that was called net neutrality. That sounds good, right? Keep the net neutral, let it develop, let it grow, let it work. Well, it wasn't net neutrality. Government put a heavy thumb on it, dictating where it could go, how it could be used, how the maps were put in place where they're at, and the restrictions put on it. We know that the internet developed pretty much on its own.
DARPA.
all of a sudden we got it moving forward. And one of the greatest tools that mankind has experienced with the internet, the ability to see it move forward in a private sector approach. Well, all of a sudden we want to control that and dictate what it can do, what it can't do, when it can do it, where it can be. Well, all of a sudden we began seeing the loss of investment in by whether it's energy companies or internet companies, etc., investing in putting more fiber out there, rural broadband. I experienced that. I didn't have till last March. I didn't have rural broadband. I had a little MiFi. It was expensive. Couldn't use it well. Couldn't trust it to be working when I needed it. All of a sudden, I get rural broadband with neighbors all over the area because Midwest Energy had now, since we did away with net neutrality, gave them hope that the government wasn't going to step in at some point in time after they planned major investments and say you can't do it this way, we're going to take away your ability to achieve financial success, because that's what it takes to lay the fiber or the satellites, whatever you use. So that began. And so living outside in the suburbs of Tipton, maybe some of you have gone down M50 and seen Tipton, which is a yellow flashing light, what's left of it after the Palm Sunday tornado. I'm in the suburbs of Tipton. Now in the suburbs of Tipton, I have the same thing that people in Monroe City have in capabilities. And now I know that it's moving up toward Manchester, Clinton, and other places. We don't want to walk backwards on that. And so we've been pushing, and this is one thing that Democrats and Republicans work together pretty strongly on. I'm one of the co-chairmen of the 5G caucus with Debbie Dingell, who's my co-chairman, and we have several others who are co-chairmen as well, Republicans and Democrats. And we're pushing for #1 mapping, responsible mapping, so that in Bedford Township, if a fiber line goes across the corner, they don't map it out as Bedford Township is fully served, when in fact only a corner of it may be served. And so we're pushing on those type of things in expansion. We do not want to get back into doing what we did with net neutrality, or else we'll see that go away. Also, on the infrastructure proposal the President's put out, it has rural broadband in it. I'm delighted for that. But the other language in it causes concerns. It talks about investing more in underserved areas. So does that mean we go into a community that's had broadband for quite some time, but it's not at the level of capability of new broadband, and so we fix that for them first before a small township gets it, or Dexter, or Manchester gets a full coverage? That's a challenge that we want to see not take place. And so we'll keep pushing that area. But I sit on the Telecom Subcommittee on Energy and Commerce, and we deal with that day in, day out.
Yeah, thank you. I know you've been a lot of hard work on that, especially bipartisanship. I know, especially with COVID, it's been a big issue now. And a lot of schools get technology grants, the students get netbooks, and then they go home, they don't have Wi-Fi, they use netbooks. That's like, it's a principle and it's a huge issue. I know the Wi-Fi issue, there's libraries. I work for Senator Sheriff Brown, especially in Bedford, Ohio. The library had a 4-month waiting list to check out the Wi-Fi. Also going to have, broadband. My concern is that by the time we get the broadband, we'll be behind already.
Yeah.
It'll be so late.
Well, let's make sure we catch up to people that don't have anything first, and then move forward. But I think we can handle it. And there's new ideas coming out every day of how we can do it better with satellite. It's going to be exciting opportunities. But we've seen silver lining of COVID is that we found out that a lot of people can indeed work remote from home or otherwise, that small businesses can be run out of home, that certain education can be done. We shouldn't have a snow day anymore. Just send the kids home, keep them home, do the education during the snow day, that would have been, and keep going. We have to worry about the days in class and having to go a few extra days at the end of the school year and plan that into your schedule. So those are things we got to build on. And I'm excited to see what my grandkids and great-grandkids will have that I never contemplated. And it's advancing so rapidly. That's why we can't abuse the system. Keep it as free as possible. Because the mind, the creativity in the private sector to come up with things is amazing. Other questions? Yes, sir.
My direct question is, I saw something that's floating through the Congress and the Rules Committee about it's labeled History and Re-Education, and it's tied to the 1719 Act. 1619, I'll get the numbers flipped up. But I'd like to just add a little history before we get into that, if I may. I've been around life a little bit. I'm 72 years old, and I had some good history teachers, good civic teachers. Traveled extensively to Mexico, Vietnam, Germany, south side of the United States, west side of the United States. I witnessed the tanks rolling into Detroit. I witnessed the slum, the poorest of the poor in Mexico. I witnessed death on a daily basis. What I can't stand by and say nothing about is when I feel that my sons and my grandsons, that their future, which I fought some 700,000 other veterans fought for years and died for, just to stand by and watch some things that we fought so hard for in this country to deteriorate. And history and education is a very important part of that solid ground.
I agree with you. And history is not neat.
We learn from our history.
We ought to
We
learn.
keep perpetually learning from our history mistakes.
We should.
And real leaders someday, maybe never, will learn from our history of war. There's no winners.
Well, that's concern, what we're seeing now, trying to sanitize history. Our nation isn't perfect. Our nation is a perfecting union. And we learn, as my dad used to tell me, in the south side of Chicago where I grew up, that our nation wasn't perfect. And in concept with race issues, we should never go backwards. As my dad said, there is one race. That's the human race. And all blood is red. And we are all created by God. Dad said to his two twin sons that he recognized that there was a history of the United States that happened before his mother and father came over from Sweden. There was a black mark on our history where we'd gone through it, we battled a war, and ultimately had emancipation. And that continues on today, but I don't want to go backwards. I want to learn from what was wrong and how we righted it and how we continue to write it. So 1619 piece of education tool or critical race theory is not the way to go. To sanitize and to make America a bad nation when it's the most compassionate nation that has ever graced this earth and has impacted the world for good, even in our imperfection. There's not another country that has a better history. And I want my grandkids and great-grandkids to know that in a full history. I look at what Monroe did here with the statue of Custer, where there was a coming together and came to a compromise that will keep the statue up of a man who did many good things and was involved in some bad things, representing his country and with orders to do. But nonetheless, now there's going to be a marker that will have a fuller history. And so our kids can understand that Custer wasn't all bad, nor was he all good, nor was everything that America did relative to the Indians. And I don't know how many of you traveled out to the Battle of Bighorn area and seen it. It takes your breath away from a reality of what went on there. But those are good things that I think we can learn from. So I agree with you. I want the full history. Defining America as a bad country or Michigan as a bad state, simply because of history. We don't do that anymore. I sit on the Education and Labor Committee in Congress, and we have legislation that has been offered, that I support, but will go nowhere because of Democrat majority in the House at this point in time. But we need to keep pushing the fact that history is something we ought to applaud. Using the intro there, we ought to applaud history as something that we've lived through and we learn from and we grow better. And this country has grown better, much better.
Applauding slavery, applauding Jim Crow, applauding an insurrection.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Paul, it's good to see you again with your mask off, too. I've read a lot from you. Haven't agreed with any of it, but it's good to see you here.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I have a couple questions about your support of democracy in this country. And there's been questions raised in the newspaper. I know you read those. And the last two township halls, or your township halls that you had, have been haven't been posted on your event site until after the fact. I snapshotted this last night at 9:18, and it says it says there are currently no posted events. And I'm wondering, how do people find out about if you support democracy in this country? How do people find out about your town halls?
Well, Paul, I support Republican form of democracy. That's the republic. That's a constitutional democracy. So be very careful in your words. I don't support democracy. I support
Yeah, you throwing out my vote, right? You want to throw out the vote?
Republic democracy is the best
betrayal of
democracy
your
because
own
we have a
money.
constitution. A
What do you think
constitution that
self-governance
explains
is?
exactly what the minority and the majority get. And that's equal rights.
Self-governance.
I've explained this, Paul, to you many times, because I think you bring it up regularly at the town halls we used to have, about announcing where we're going to be. We follow carefully the guidance and the directives of security. Not only for me. I don't want to have death threats. I don't want to have plots toward that, but I also don't want to have those type of things cause concerns for you as well. So the Capitol Police, the Sergeant at Arms, make it very clear how we are supposed to do things like this if we're still going to have it. Very few members of Congress have live town hall meetings. I love live town hall meetings. I have more than the average bear in Congress town hall meetings. The last number was only 9 others had more town hall meetings or equal to me. I think it's important to have, we call them community gatherings now because we can't necessarily know that we can be in a town hall until we can take the masks off. So we're doing that, but that's the reason. That's the reason. So we also use our franking dollars to send out information to the localities we're going to be in, to make sure that they are here and have the opportunity to choose to be here. We do robocalls. You know, you probably all receive robocalls from me. And none of this is done by our staff. We pay a service to do this for us, because I can't keep track of when you move here or when you leave here. We do it that way. So it's not done politically, but we follow security guidelines. And that's all I can say.
So how would today's event find out?
I'm going to call on my comms director to explain exactly how it went out. Yeah, well, let me say, there was phone calls that were made, there were emails that we make. That's how it gets out.
2 supporters. Got
No.
a letter in the mail. Great, thank you. Supporters get notifications. information.
I don't think we have all supporters here.
I know, because
I can tell
somebody
that,
found
so.
out about it who wasn't supposed to, so you
And,
get
and,
pilloried
and, and
in
we have
public for
people
supporting
here
the
who are from
insurrection.
other parts, not this community either.
The ladies at the YMCA.
It was an insurrection.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll tell us again about how he would have
So we
saved
have
George
another,
Floyd's
we have
life.
another question. We have cards here, so, okay.
Very honestly, who do you personally think won the presidential election?
Joe Biden is president of the United States.
Yeah. Because he won the election and there wasn't widespread voter fraud. Because you lie about it all the time. Technology.
Any other questions?
Nobody wants to hear you.
I couldn't care less what you want, sir.
Oh, that describes where you're from then.
We've got some questions here. Any that haven't been. Okay.
I was just wondering if you would address the capital gains issue on land and set up tax bases. Farm Bureau's
Ooh, a socialist farmer.
really,
That's a good question.
Let me just preface this, because
there's
it was said.
27 states that have a stepped up tax basis at 400%. And that's not very good for a landowner, or a homeowner, or a business owner to have that type of tax. It's a proposal, in my understanding right now. I don't believe it's passed.
It hasn't passed yet.
It will not be a good thing.
It'll be a terrible thing.
Very good.
When we saw the expansion of business and industry, but more importantly, jobs, lowest unemployment rates in history for individuals, but individuals especially of minority status, that they'd never seen before. Female unemployment. But the general middle class was raising through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Businesses were coming back from overseas. Agriculture was growing.
Very important. Is our votes as American citizens going to go to who we vote for? And she brought up the issue of Dominion voting machines, and are they going to be used again? And then a similar question, Tom said 2022 mail-in ballots, identification for ballots. He received 4 ballots in the mail prior to the election. How do you feel about all of that?
You know, the one thing that we need in this country and in our states is an assurance that our votes count, and that that bottom line people who vote are legal voters, and those that aren't legal aren't allowed to vote. That's all we ask.
No, it's not.
That's all that America wants, is that legal voters are the ones who vote. Now, how do we determine whether they're legal or not? Well, number one, if they're registered to vote, and that can be documented. So I've asked questions over and over again, what is wrong about having a legal ID, whether it's a driver's license, or in this state, you can get a free legal ID from the state. You don't have to have a driver's license.
How do you make your
It's
appointment
given
with the
free.
Secretary of State online if you don't have a computer?
So you
How do
can
you
walk
drive there
down
if
to
you don't
the
have a
Secretary
car?
of State's office, or you can mail it in and you can get an ID. Same way that you need an ID if you're going to underage or look like you're underage. I don't have problems with those things anymore. But you got to show that to get any alcohol. You got to show that to get into various museums. You have to go show that to will call if you're going to get your baseball tickets. You got to show an ID that says who you are. There isn't anything wrong with that. That's all we're asking. And so when you hear the misinformation out there that we're trying to restrict voting,
That's exactly
it's
what
just
you're
not
doing.
true at all.
You're in a gerrymandered
We're
district.
trying
The
to-
state of Michigan said,
Nobody wants
the
to hear
Supreme
you.
Court of the United States said was an illegal, the
Whoa.
Supreme Court of Michigan said was an illegal
Whoa.
gerrymander. Because Republicans
Quiet.
cheated and gave themselves more representation than they were entitled to. You
You
are
know,
nothing but
you know,
voter
we're gonna answer your
suppressors,
question.
voter intimidators, liars, oath breakers. You're a traitor, sir. You've betrayed the foundational principles of the Republic.
you don't have an idea what the foundational
I
principles
do
are.
too. It's more than just
So let's
the
go
Second
on with
Amendment.
this. What we're asking here in this state is that you have a legitimate ID, that we know that there are solid dates where those votes have to be in. Is that too much to ask? That it can't extend beyond the voting date. That it's there. That you have ballot boxes that are put out there remotely, that are safe and secure, that there are lights on it, that there are people that are watching it, so we know that we don't have a situation like we had this past year. Do we want to go through it again? This year we did it because of COVID. That was the reason why it was opened up so many ways to vote. COVID was the reason. At least that
People
was
of
the
the
reason.
state of Michigan voted.
So bottom line is, we want to make sure that next time around, Republicans and Democrats all believe that it was a legitimate election. That's not too much to ask, is it? Win, lose, or
It's
draw.
always too much to ask.
I've lost elections and I've won elections. I just want to know when I lost that it was legitimate, and I believe it was. And I want to know when I won it was legitimate, and I believe it was. And that's all we're asking. Whether it's Georgia
It is
or
not
whether
what
it's
you're
Michigan,
asking. It's what
well,
you're
if you
doing.
look at and
Dominion
you
stole
actually
our
read
vote,
the bill,
bro. Dominion stole our
You
vote.
tried to throw
If
out
you
the
actually
vote.
Dominion
read the bill.
stole
That's
our
the
vote.
only thing that matters for the rest of your career is that you violated your
Dominion,
oath of
based in
office
Serbia.
and you tried to disenfranchise the people
technology.
you represent.
3:42 a.m.
That's all that
machines connected
matters.
to the
Is your
internet.
lying and your oath
I,
and your betrayal of
I
our
trust that he will
principles.
invite you to his next town hall.
Well, I'm
And you
telling
can
you,
enjoy that
I'm
at
gonna
that
be at
point.
your next one,
Dominion out of Michigan.
next one,
Let me ask you, let me address one more question. And that's about redistricting. We're going through it right now. It's going to be done by a commission.
Too bad it won't be gerrymandered
It's
into the next district, huh?
this gerrymander idea is something that's tossed about by the leftists. But when you have seven Republicans in Congress right now and 7 Democrats, that sounds like a real gerrymander, especially since it was done under the APAL plan, which was a Democrat election commissioner, Bernard APAL. I'm old enough to remember him. And it was put in place. There was never a challenge. There was never a challenge to redistricting in the last 3 decades.
Michigan Supreme Court.
Never. There was
It went
never
all
a
the way to
challenge.
the Supreme Court of the United States.
It did not go to the Supreme Court of the United States. And you need to know that for a fact.
You're lying.
That they approved the last redistricting and this redistricting. There's a statement out there that I took my seat back because they redistricted so the guy who beat me couldn't beat me again. When I took my seat back after I'd been defeated in 2008, came back in 2010, it was an exact same district. I didn't have Monroe County in my district then, I had Calhoun County. And I defeated the same guy in that district. So, bottom line is, you gotta be careful with what you're listening to that caused you to go to a commission that took away your right to select who the redistricts the
It's
state,
empowering
as opposed
them
to using
to have an
the
independent
state legislature that
instead
you
of you guys choosing.
Let's go to the next
your own.
question. Okay, we have one here.
Yes, Congressman, do you think, and this is Bonnie's question, do you think incentives or disincentives should be used for those who refuse to vaccinate?
No. No, I really don't. I don't think in this country we mandate things like that. And we do know that, and we've seen it already, that there are people who have gotten sick from the vaccine subsequent to having it. And we know that there are a few who have died due to getting it.
Thank you, sir.
And so
You're a
I
clown,
take the
bro.
vaccine.
You're a clown.
I take the
Not a
vaccine.
liar, though.
I have not had any problem with it, except I had this come out of my chin afterwards. And I don't know whether it's from the vaccine, but anyway, it's there. But I think vaccines, whether it's polio, when I was a kid, polio was taking people's lives, changing their lives. We eradicated polio for all intents and purposes because of the vaccine. I'm glad that there are flu vaccines. I haven't always taken a flu vaccine, but it's my choice. This year I took a flu vaccine. This year I took a COVID vaccine. I have Pfizer running through my body. It's a Michigan company. So, and I'm glad I had it. But I think I think each of you ought to make that decision yourself on the best science that you understand. And I encourage you to study long and hard on it, but I feel confident that flu vaccines, or that the COVID vaccines are safe.
Next question. Can you talk about your position on the VA Employee Fairness Act of 2021? It would expand collective bargaining rights, the ability for VA employees to speak out to benefit their patients.
I highly support and admire veterans' health care, especially. Sometimes we have troubles with record keeping in a huge, huge system. But they are government entities. I agree with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who said that public employees should never be unionized because they are bargaining with themselves and against the taxpayer who pay their way. So I keep that position. I think we've hurt our system. We've hurt our taxpayers in many ways by allowing the expansion of, and the simple allowance of public sector's employees being given bargaining unions to bargain against the taxpayer and for themselves. That's different in the private sector. In a private sector, there ought to be unions. They do a great job, and sometimes they overstep their boundaries. But that's a total different ballgame in a free enterprise, free market system as opposed to a governmental public sector system.
Next question. You've answered the first two of Rosemary. But besides contacting our elected officials, what can we do to support the defeat of H.R. 1 and H.R. 5?
Well, H.R. 1 is the federal government takeover of elections in this country. Read the Constitution.
You guys from cheating.
That's not allowed.
Sure it is.
Our Constitution doesn't allow it.
Bam.
That the federal government establishes the election process in our states.
Voting Rights Act.
The Constitution makes it very clear that the states are responsible for elections. Our state, in its Constitution, takes that authority to establish election process.
Is the Attorney General of Texas responsible for the
And
elections
so
in Michigan?
I believe that the way we are able to keep the federalism that allows freedom amongst the states, so that if I don't like what's going on in Michigan, I can always move to Ohio.
Why
I don't
move
wanna
when
do
you
that.
can just sign on to the amicus
Or I can
brief,
move
just throw out
to
somebody's
Indiana.
vote?
But if I don't like what goes on in the United States, where do I go to? Cuba? No. Venezuela? No. Canada? No. I don't have a choice. So bottom line, that is why it was very clear put in that the states and the state legislators are responsible for elections.
Which is why
We can get to the people on that far better than if we have to go to federal government. So that's where I'm at that point, to make sure that we have a chance that, in this state they're going to be trying to move all authority for elections, tighten it down into just a few sites or a few places that will do the counting in the state, as opposed to over close to 2,000 townships and municipal governments, clerks, that do the counting. That allows us here in Monroe County, at the very worst, to go to the clerk of Monroe County and say, we don't agree that this was an accurate count. We want a census done and we want it checked out. If you did that just at one part of this, one point in our state, how do you know? That's the beauty of having elections controlled at the local and state level as opposed to federal government. So, you can contact our our U.S. senators and let them know your feelings that H.R. 1 that was passed on a totally partisan fashion, that they need to vote against that, or else that takes away the authority of the state of Michigan for votes. And again, this is truth coming out to you here. So this is what we deal with. But it's illustrative, folks, of what we're dealing with the country. When it was said if Joe Biden became president, we wouldn't have divisions anymore. That was Trump's responsibility.
Imagine
Well, we've had
8
division
weeks
here
of
today,
trying
haven't
to
we?
overthrow the government being
If you
met
agree
with
with me,
no
raise your hand.
consequences
Okay.
and no accountability. That's what we're talking
Next question.
about. That's
Did I
why
get
you're
those all
being
answered?
pilloried. That's why you're going to be
Yes, you
pilloried
did,
again
Congressman.
the
We
next
have
time
one
you
more
have a
question.
town hall.
It's from Paul. And it says, first quarter, we saw a 6.4% annual GDP growth. Household income increased 21.1%. Your 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act will leave the middle class with no tax cut in a few years, but allows your corporate donors a permanent cut. The Joint Committee on Taxation echoes this conclusion, estimating that 22,000 households making $20,000 to $30,000 will collectively pay 26.6% more in 2027 than they would have under the previous statute that year. Do you support a fair tax system that taxes everyone equally?
I supported the fair tax. That was a whole system that would have, I think, gone a long way in this country to encourage continued growth. We didn't have that opportunity. We also didn't have an opportunity to complete tax reform in 2017 because the Democrats wouldn't let us do it and bring it up in the Senate without a 60-vote cloture requirement. So we had to do it through reconciliation, which didn't allow us, according to the rules of the Senate, didn't allow us to deal with completing the tax cuts for the middle class going on further. They got tax cuts. But because of the rules that Chuck Schumer used in the Senate, we weren't allowed to go completely under reconciliation. And that's exactly what happened, and history records that. However, Paul, the reason why this economy is still humming through, to a great degree, through a pandemic, and has come out of it, even with stuff that we've done to inhibit it, like encouraging people to stay home and not take a job offered to them because of additional unemployment compensation put on top of it, is because of those tax cuts, because the economy was humming, because people had jobs, because people invested in businesses, especially the small businesses, who expanded during this time. Auto industry brought 3 plants back to Michigan, 1 in my district, 3 new engines in Dundee that weren't there before, because of the growth of the economy. That had continued, and had we been able to do the full tax cut plan that impacted the middle class in 2024 and beyond, they've had the impact already. Middle class had the largest percentage tax cut of the entire process up to this time. We would have gone on much further, Paul. So, bottom line is, it paid for itself. We had more revenue come into the federal government than any time in history, even with the tax cuts. Why? Because people use their own money. They invest, they spend, they purchase, and that goes into the economy.
It's already recovered with $2 trillion.
Next question.
You get lots of benefits.
That is all I
Sure.
have.
Short-term benefits.
Other questions?
Yeah, why'd
Yes,
you
ma'am.
throw out my vote? Why'd you try to throw out my vote?
We didn't, but that was because of COVID, to encourage people to vote, but not come into large spots. But in many cases, those weren't guarded. And when you have a Secretary of State, and you want to hear me say this, because most recent court decision, like Judge Christopher Murray, said that Jocelyn Benson, in telling all of the clerks in the state to be very flexible on signatures on absentee ballots, you could disregard those. That doesn't sound secure. And that, Christopher Murray said, you can't do that. Policy has to end. And I'm glad that made it to a court decision. There are others that are still wending their way through. When you see people in foreign countries that are willing to go vote and stick their thumb in a jar of ink, knowing that it could cost them their lives, for us to say it's difficult in America to vote, unless of course we're sick, infirm, and can't get the polls, or out of the area for voting day, I have concerns with.
People of the state of
I have
Michigan
concerns with as well.
decided otherwise.
And so we need to regenerate in our state and our country an understanding that this right to vote, and it is a right to vote, and it's a privilege too, but it's a right. And you have a right not to vote too. But your right to vote must include the right to vote legally.
What about
And all the rest of us
state
ought to
of
support
Arizona
that as well,
and Georgia
that we want to
that
see
you tried
rights.
to disenfranchise? You used
One more
your
question?
power and authority in
Yes, ma'am.
Congress to try to
I would
disenfranchise
like to
two
know
states.
that we're always going to have, where we can have the right to redo shots if we want, or any other medication of any kind. They're trying to take that away from us out here. I want to be able to refuse whatever I don't want.
That's America. That's America, and as
Are we
long.
always going to be happy? I mean, I like to keep that.
Oh yeah, I said that here today. I do not support a mandate. At a point in time, here we are in Congress, since March, not meeting on the floor of the House, all of us together at the same time. And we have members of Congress that are voting by proxy. When I read in the Constitution, it's those elected and serving, and that's always meant you have to be on the floor of the House to vote. But that's not taking place now. So I don't know, on any given vote by anyone who votes by proxy, whether they just told whoever's voting by proxy, however you vote the same way for me. I don't think the 7th District would want to think that I'm calling in my votes like that. But add to that, members of Congress early on had the opportunity to get vaccinated. Why? Because we're essential to our republic to be there serving and dealing with the issues of state. So we all had that. I got my first shot in December, my second in January. All of the other members had the same opportunity. So by now, we all should be vaccinated. And according to the CDC, we can't pass it on, can't get us. And that chamber is a pretty large piece of property. We'd all be there together. To see the State of the Union or the address to Congress last week, and to see that partially filled with people who've been all vaccinated or had the opportunity to be vaccinated, and if they chose not to, well, that's their choice. And have the Vice President of the United States and the Speaker of the House sitting behind the President with masks on in a chamber partially filled. It hurt me to see that.
Imagine how I felt.
That's the first State of the
signed
Union I've
on
not
to
been
throw
to.
out my vote.
The opportunity
Talk about
to
a
be there.
betrayal and a feeling that
And
your
so,
country is
that's what
being
we're looking at now. I think we
destroyed
still have a
by the agents
responsibility
of a party
to
who
do what's
fomented
helpful
that
to everybody
insurrection.
concerned. But that's a right, madam, that Americans have to make a choice, and I will defend that right. I want to say thank you to all of you who are being here. I want to say thank you for your attentiveness to the issues, willingness to come out. I'm probably speaking to the crowd, to the choir here, as it were. But this is what America is all about. Even dissent, though it may be ugly and irrational, it's still
It's
part of the
totally
process.
irrational of me
And so
to
thank
be
you for
upset
being here.
that there was a violent
Love
insurrection
America.
in Washington, D.C., which